distinguished guests, honorable ministers, excellencies, colleagues, friends. Thank you all for joining today for this event entitled Borrowers Coordination, Post-Financing for Development. Where do we go from here? It's my pleasure to introduce and welcome you to this event. My name is Hannah Ryder. I'm the CEO of Development Reimagined, one of the three partners coordinating to organize this event. So on behalf of ACET, the Africa Center for Economic Transformation, the Institute of Economic Justice, and Development Reimagined, I welcome you warmly to this discussion. The reason to focus on borrower coordination is because the international financial system has been, until very recently, extremely lender-centric. For many reasons, for that primary reason, many of the designs in the system that we find influence issues such as how we treat debt, the cost of capital, how we think of risk, how we deal with the African continent, some of the key gaps in financing on the African continent. The reason is because of this creditor-centric system, because creditors' interests are prioritized and borrowers' interests do not come to the fore. And when borrowers are not involved in design, then things are designed badly, fundamentally. The disadvantage has happened with regards to developing countries, especially in African countries, leading to inadequate access to affordable, high-quality financing and even debt relief. There have been historical efforts at borrower coordination, whether it's the highly indebted poor countries network, driven in particular by friends at Development Finance International. There was even the Cartagena process for Latin America and the Committee of 10 Ministers of Finance for Africa. These did demonstrate successes in amplifying borrowers' voices. But to date, those initiatives have not continued. There are many coordination initiatives which have been launched over the past decades. We will hear about many of those. They've spanned formal partnerships, advocacy platforms, capacity building efforts. We've written about those, Development Reimagined and ACET. You'll find out about them. For African countries, there are at least 32 initiatives that we have access to. But nevertheless, there's still more, and we're here to discuss what those gaps will be. So with that background, as Development Reimagined, we have worked very strongly for many years to try to encourage more coordination on these issues. From our vantage points in China, where we saw that coordination delivers, but there's significantly more opportunity for that, but also specifically with regards to financial issues that African countries are faced with and dealing with specific creditors one by one. We've proposed new forums, we've proposed new instruments, including an actual financial tool, which is based on the model promoted by Mohammed Yunus of village level microfinance borrowing elevated to the sovereign level where countries borrow together. Another, in a sense, a varying opportunity to introduce into the international financial system that doesn't exist right now in delivery, but certainly is something for multilateral financial institutions to aspire to. But we're here to discuss all these types of options. We've had significant progress at the Financing for Development conference, which we will hear about, and also organizations such as the G20 Africa Expert Panel, which I also sit on. We've also been deliberating how outcomes can be taken forward through the G20 as well. So we're here to hear about that, here to interrogate those questions, and I look forward to all of the insights that we will gather through this dialogue. With that opening, I would like to welcome all of you, and welcome in particular Honourable Minister Yasser Sobi, the Vice Minister for Fiscal Policy for Egypt, who will give us more in-depth opening remarks and give us a keynote speech on the topic of borrower coordination from Egypt's perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank Development Reimagined, ACET, and all organizers, if I missed anyone. But really, I'm happy to participate in this important event. As you know, this is one of the main output coming from Seville FFD4, and we are very happy to coordinate, and we are very happy with the role of all the institutions that are working to foster and to enhance the work and going forward. We are very happy to endorse this initiative with focus on engaging in South-South peer learning, leveraging technical assistance on debt management in the region, and advanced innovative climate finance. But let me take some time to get into much more details of what this initiative is about and how it can work to the benefit of the countries, and not only in Africa, but I think in all the borrowers across the globe. And let me start by saying that the debt challenge facing developing countries today is not just a question of liquidity or solvency. It is a developmental crisis. More than half of developing economies are in or at high risk of debt distress. Debt service in some African and middle income countries now consumes a third or more of fiscal revenues, crowding out vital investment in growth, resilience, and people. Just to let you know that in Egypt, even after reducing debt to GDP by more than 10 percentage points in 2 years, still the debt service is consuming 50% of the budget and around 80% of total revenue. This is still very high. This is the main challenge that are facing. The economy is growing. We are achieving primary surpluses over the year. Last year in 24-25, we reached 3.5% of GDP as a primary surplus. Tax revenues are increasing by 35%. External debt is being reduced significantly, $4 billion in 2 years in the stock of government debt. So things are improving, but still debt service is still high and challenging. The Seville Financing for Development Conference made it clear that debt and development must be addressed together. Borrower countries need a structured platform to coordinate their positions, share lessons, and advocate collectively for reforms that ensure that supports development rather than constrains it. Recently, Egypt and Zambia co-hosted the first technical and ministerial consultations, serving as joint conveners of the preparatory process. The club's proposed functions include the forum. It's providing technical support for debt negotiations, coordinating borrower positions ahead of IMF and World Bank and G20 discussions, and facilitating South-South peer learning on debt management and transparency. Egypt views the creation of a Borrowers Forum as one of the most strategic and pragmatic reforms emerging from the Seville commitment, as we said, and the global consensus on debt architecture reform. The forum represents a critical instrument to institutionalize collective voice, technical cooperation, and capacity building among debtor countries, anchored in transparency, equity, and solidarity. Egypt strongly supports this effort to institutionalize borrower coordination. It's always a lender word, and I think this kind of borrower coordination is really interesting and important and can benefit a lot the countries. Egypt and Zambia's engagement since Seville reflects a shared conviction that borrower coordination is essential to make global processes more inclusive, predictable, and fair. We'd like to emphasize that the forum must go beyond political symbolism, should evolve into an operational, data-driven, and ministerially owned platform that enhances debt management capacity, coordinates borrower engagement with creditors, and institutionalizes peer learning on innovative instruments, particularly climate-related debt clauses, swaps, and sustainably linked financing. We are very eager to promote the debt swaps, debt investment swaps, debt to development swaps. I think we had several transactions or several examples of this has been done, and it proved it's a win-win situation. It's a win for the country, the borrower, but win also is a win-win for also the lender that can get a higher return on their investments. So we are advocating for simple, clear, and non-bureaucratic governance, advocate simple and governing council, a steering committee, secretariat, and that's kind of things that can move forward with this initiative. I don't want to go into a lot of details on this, but we that we are confirm the ongoing efforts and that is done either on the governmental level or from other institutions, and we are going to support that and reaffirm that the forum is based on complementarity, not confrontationality with creditors. It strengthens cooperation with creditors and existing initiatives while fixing the long-standing coordination deficit among borrowers. Last thing I would like to say that it could operationalize the UN 11 measures and the 3 commitment with practical tools like the DSA module, the TA hub, the standards, moving from ad hoc responses to a predictable system. Thank you very much, and I would like a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
My name is Luis Kasekende. I am the moderator of the discussion. Let me start by expressing our thanks to the Vice Minister and also to Ryder for sharing with us the objectives of this borrower forum and the likely benefits, not only to the borrowers, but also to the creditors. I'm so honored to have been invited. Thanks a lot for inviting MEFMI. I am the executive director of MEFMI. It is based in Harare, Zimbabwe. Our institute commends this very bold initiative to create a platform aimed at strengthening the collective voice of borrower nations. I think the case for a very harmonized position of borrowers has just been made, and I think we will be hearing more from the panelists. I'll be putting some questions to these panelists, but for now, let me first of all introduce the panelists. We have Honorable Dr. Chola Milambo, who is the permanent representative of Zambia to the United Nations. Then Mr. Mahmoud, is he around?
He hasn't. He's still on his way.
Oh, he's still on his way. When he joins us, he is the UN Special Envoy for Sustainable Development Finance. Then we have Dr. Hodan Osman, the governor of the Development Bank of Somalia. We have Mr. Michael Sachs as part of this panel. He's from the Secretariat of the G20 expert panel. And I think we will start with Dr. Milambo. I know you have another engagement that I would like to hear from you, and you share with us those potential benefits of having a borrowers forum, but also sharing with us why Zambia has played a very active role in establishing this borrowers forum. What is that motivation? How will the forum assist countries like Zambia who have faced debt challenges in recent years? So, Doctor, please.
Thank you very much, Executive Director, and such a pleasure to be here with all the colleagues who are in the room and those who are online. Just want to take my hat off to the conveners, ACET, the Institute of Economic Justice and Development Reimagined. Thank you very much. It's great to be with this distinguished panel to discuss such an important topic. Indeed, I will have to transition at a certain point in time. I have a discussion on the other side on the very same topic, and maybe I'll touch on it a bit later. But just to your question, really as a motivation, Zambia, firstly, is a country that is squarely focused on the issue of development. We found ourselves somewhat in the eye of the storm when it came to the issue of debt restructuring some 5 years ago. And we are here to, not just change things around, but also to change the narrative that a country can go through a struggle but still emerge on the other side stronger. But with the right reforms, owning the process, with the right external environment, a right internal environment. On the foreign policy side, Zambia is anchored its foreign policy on economic diplomacy. And in the context of a multilateral environment, that means that we need to be much more active in advocating for the SDGs and financing for development. Just to zero in further, we stepped on the stage to engage in the financing for development agenda. We know that this framework is going to guide international cooperation on development finance for the next 10 years. We felt that as we approach the SDGs, it's really important to accelerate development. Now, a key constraint, as has been highlighted by the Honorable Minister, is the issue around debt. And debt service as it stands right now remains a major constraint to development, the levels of debt service. Not that debt itself is bad, it's just that the current levels are constraining our ability to invest in the SDGs. And so something had to be done. Through the negotiations that took place over the past year and a half, member states made it very clear, and especially the African countries, that this document would really make a difference if it had a strong position on debt. And through the negotiations, which, by the way, were not very easy, but through the negotiations, we had agreement around several initiatives. One of them, of course, is around the debt swaps. And that was embraced by many countries during the Seville conference at the SPA. And then we also had initiatives around debt registry, and of course, our very own 48I, paragraph 48I, which talks about the borrowers forum. And so our role, of course, as Zambia being co-facilitators, pen holders, was to govern the process, guide the process, and hopefully get to a point where we can have a consensus document around this issue. So, coming from the Global South now, a document is a document, right? It's only as good as its application. And so within the context of having an eye on 2030 agenda, we feel that implementation is the next thing. We want results. Results come from implementation. And when we scan the document, you can see that there's sufficient political support around the Borrowers Forum, especially if we get a good secretariat in place. And on that basis, we, just as by way of update, and I'll pause there, by way of update, ever since July, when we adopted the document by consensus, Zambia and Egypt have stepped forward to coordinate with developing countries, potential non-creditor countries. And we have touched base on several of the issues that the Honorable Minister raised, the issue of what would this Borrower platform look like, what's its mandate, and other core issues which should be a contour of a new institution, which is the issues around eligibility, the issues around decision-making, what should the secretariat look like, what should be the role of the secretariat, and what is the role of member states. We are expecting that very soon the ministers of finance will pick this up. Right now it's sitting with the ministries of foreign affairs, been at the UN, but fundamentally the ministries of finance needs to pick up this agenda. We had a great consultation at UNGA with ministers of finance, and here at the annual meetings we expect now the ministers of finance to pick up the matter and then run with it. But the key issue remains implementation, and then us folks from New York can go back and look at the document and pick up the next agenda.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think as a very quick follow-up, how will it sit within the broader global financial architecture? I know you are saying let the ministers pick it up, work with it, but how will it fit within the broader financial?
Yeah, very good question. I mean, we have to look at the what are we fundamentally trying to address, and I think the report that has been prepared highlights the issue, and the minister spoke to issue. There's a deficit in coordination among the global South countries. There's no, as we sit, there's no global platform of non-borrowers where they can talk to each other in a safe space. All right, exclusively borrower platform, it does not exist. And so we need to get to a point where borrowers can sit together and discuss these issues, compare notes, an opportunity for peer learning, an opportunity to see how other countries have done ABCD. So that's where we are. But we have to look at the whole ecosystem. If you remember your mathematics, there's the issue of the universal set. And if you look at the universal set of member states, you find that you have little bubbles which are much more organized, like you have the Paris Club, but the borrowers are dotted within that universal space, and they respond to the environment that is there. So if you want to really be at the table, like Hannah put it, we'd have to galvanize ourselves so that we form a platform that will now coordinate with the existing platforms. We know that there's the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable. So part of the discussion with member states would be how do we interface this borrowers club with the existing mechanisms? Will there be an opportunity to engage with the Paris Club? Will there be an opportunity to engage with the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable or any other institution that is within this ecosystem? We do note, of course, already the other existing borrower platforms which are galvanizing them and have done some great work so far, such as the Organization for Southern Cooperation. Very interesting work there, and I think there's scope to build upon those mechanisms that are there. So that's where we are. It's part of the discussion that member states will have to determine as they make this institution come to life.
Thanks a lot. We'll come back to you on this and other issues, but I want to move on to Dr. Osman. You've listened in to the Vice Minister, to Dr. Milambo on the potential benefits, and you may have other potential benefits that you want to add on. And how can development banks leverage the forum for competitive funding or even concessional fund?
It's all beneficial having such a forum. I think just to kind of just say a little bit about Somalia and where we are, we're almost like the new kid on the block when it comes to borrowing, because we've recently gotten debt relief at the end of 2023. So our debt to GDP ratio is actually less than 5% at the moment. So we really are in a position where we are starting from the beginning and trying to make really good, sound, fiscal decisions around debt, as well as, where are we spending this debt. So this is something that's been incredibly important to us. And I think having such a forum would also put us in a position to be able to have some really great peer learning and understand, what were the pitfalls, what were the lessons learned that we can get from other countries, and get these types of ideas from them as well. And I think some of the things that we've already engaged in when you were talking about concessional financing, I think in the beginning, I mean, this is what we are going to access. I think it'll be really difficult for us to kind of go to market right away. But one of the things that Somalia was successfully been able to do and lobby for is, though even though we are at a very low debt to GDP ratio, we're still in a position where it is a fragile state. We aren't able to really take on debt in a serious way as yet. So we're able to negotiate with the World Bank and get an exception on our IDA terms, where IDA terms for the next 3 years are also going to be on grant basis and not concessional. And that was an exception that was made by really, laying out, why you don't want to cripple a fragile states with low, revenue to GDP ratio with debt right away. That we do need that space to come out and grow of it. And it was successful. Precisely, we had, our peer, African countries in the regions that were also helping and lobbying for us. We brought together the creditors, and we were lobbying with them as well to kind of support this. So there was a lot of lobbying exercise done to be able to get, such an exception that wasn't kind of given before in that particular place, particularly in this environment. And I think now that we've received this exception, I think talks of this is also on the table for countries like Syria, who would be coming into this place soon, and countries like Yemen. So there is, some kind of lesson there in terms of, the advocacy around, making the case and point of not burdening, countries, with this level of debt. I think the other areas that we are able to benefit from by having such a borrowers club, I mean, it's not so much that, we move from a, passive recipient position to a more, like to more of an active negotiator in these spaces by setting the frameworks and understanding the terms. But really, it's addressing for me like two really big, mismatches that are happening in the market. And I think one of them is, the risk perception of African countries. And I think that's something that, a lot of institutions were dealing with. I think last year, the former president of the African Development Bank issued a study by Moody's Analytic to kind of really understand, what is the loss rate, of African infrastructure investments. And what he found was that it was like, what Moody's found was like it was 1.7%. And I think when you compare that to other areas, I think Latin America was at 13%, Eastern Europe was at 10%. So that's a stark difference of where we are. So this perception of risk, that there's a real mismatch in it, I think having a borrowers club can really be able to kind of bring attention to that and be in that way. I think the other mismatch is quite a historical one. So I have to go way back for this one. But after World War II, when Europe was being reconstructed, some really focused thought and consideration was given to the way of giving debt at that point. I mean, like the debt was there for the purpose, the goals of the debt were for the purposes of like reinvigorating trade and building industry, and the terms as well were done in such a way to not to cripple the countries with debt while they're going. In fact, I think one of the ways it was structured is in terms of debt servicing, not to be any more than 3% of Germany's annual export earnings at the time. So you could imagine, what the approach was at that time for Europe, knowing that what they had to do to grow. And I think it was done because Europe was seen as a viable market for globally for it to be. And I think we need to shift that perception in Africa as well. So not only are we not as risky as they're making it out to seem, but at the same time, we are a viable market and we should be invested in for that reason. And I think finally, just to kind of bring it back around to my bank, the development bank, and what our role in this would be, I think our role in this would be on the other side of it. So bad debt is not bad debt just because it's expensive or a lot, but it's also bad debt when we look at, what are we spending this debt on ultimately? Is this something that's really going to yield the investments that we want? And I think institutions such as national development banks have really been valuable in Africa. And I think traditionally, where they may have had bad governance, or where they almost have been seen as slush funds, I think their roles are changing now, and they could be institutions that are depoliticized, institutions that can look at how do we structure, bankable projects for governments, by giving it to the hand of experts, by depoliticizing it, by really looking at what the terms of these loans and structures would be before a country then looks at to invest. So in Somalia, I'd like to say our very first debt that we're taking on right now, we're in negotiations with one of the DFIs on our very first debt, and our very first debt would be coming to the Somali Development Bank. So I think this is how my country's kind of seeing the role of the bank and making sure that, as we're borrowing, we're really borrowing for things that are bankable. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. But do you think that it is much easier for Somalia before you get into debt distress, that you can get the creditors and the debtors in one room and speak with one voice, don't cripple Somalia, as opposed to a situation where you are already in default and you want to strengthen the voice of the borrower?
I don't think anything's easy from where you sit. I think it's I mean, like, we have, I wouldn't say we've defaulted. I mean, we've gotten debt relief because our arrears needed to be forgiven. So we weren't starting from a great position in that way. But yes, I guess in some ways it is easy in the sense that, we could make the argument we are fragile states. This is something that's needed to kind of build up a fragile states. And I think the reason, and also this is why we are pushing for concessional financing, but there is a limited allocation to concessional financing. So that's our problem as well. So we can't go into market and start borrowing. Like, we're only also limited by how much concessional financing we need to borrow. We're also limited by not just what's available to us, but also how much can we take on because of our really low revenue base. And I think what we've been doing is that and I think I was talking to my colleague here right now, is that we've been following the rules. I think for the past 10 years, to get to debt relief, to finish the HIPC process, we followed all the rules and did everything exactly how it should be done. I think we're like the IMF's darling because, like, we've never missed the benchmark. We've kind of gone through these steps. But honestly, like, I'm asking myself, like, what comes after you follow the rules? Like, are we really going to be rewarded for following these rules? Like, we've yet to see. And I could honestly say Zambia probably also followed the rules and they're finding themselves in this position as well. So I don't think it's easier on one end than the other, which is why I think we need each other more than anything to be part of the same club.
Thanks a lot. Michael, I want to come to you. We've listened to the benefits from the previous speakers, but I want you to pick on any shortcomings that you might see going forward. Are there shortcomings from prioritizing borrower-only initiatives? How do we harmonize that? I know Ryder was talking about several initiatives, but how do we get to harmonizing these initiatives?
So the Africa expert panel was appointed by the Minister of Finance of South Africa in his capacity as chair of the finance track this year. Consists of about 30 academics, mainly based on the African continent, and is trying to advise the minister on how South Africa should think about, in its role as G20 chair, questions related to the cost of capital and how to accelerate investment in Africa, but also questions related to how to respond to the debt crisis. In a sense, in respect of debt, our job is very easy. We were appointed quite late in the process, but the job is made easy because there are many excellent reports and ideas already out there circulating about debt. So ours is not really to reinvent those wheels, but simply emphasize and highlight some of the proposals that we think will be most impactful. And one of those proposals, I think the panel has agreed, is the idea of a borrowers club. But our work is not particularly original. We're building on also the UNSG had a panel which made excellent proposals in this regard, which maybe Mahmoud will talk about later, but also the work of Development Reimagined and ACET and others, and the excellent briefing note that they prepared. And I should also mention and shout out to the IEJ, who's also been working in this area. It's for us to take account of this and emphasize it. I think the added value the Africa Expert Panel brings is that it is directly connected to the finance track of the G20. And as our colleague from Zambia was saying, the finance track is the finance ministers are the critical ministers, both on the debtor side, but also on the creditor side. So the panel has been working very closely with the two seats that Africa has on the G20 finance track, South Africa and the AU. And I suppose the Borrowers Club idea, I think it's very important to strengthen the voice. I think that the strength of this work, particularly by Development Reimagined, was this creditor centricity of the system. And we are talking here about, let's be honest, power relations in global finance. A debt relation has issues of power embedded within it, and we can never go away from that. So some idea of tilting the playing field in favor of borrowers and strengthening their voice has got to be a central reform. But also it's a reform that, in a sense, we don't need permission from creditors to form a debtors club. So in a situation which we are certainly facing now, where the limits of what can be achieved in processes such as, for instance, the G20 finance track are becoming clear, it's important that we turn to, we're trying to identify things that can feasibly done. And this is feasible because it depends on us, in a sense, the borrowers, if you like. But it also does pose difficult questions. One of them is about what is the definition of a borrower, and how does that relate to other fora that tend to unite the global South, whether that is in the UN system or anywhere else? Because as soon as we say we must organize ourselves as borrowers, increasingly countries from the global South are playing the role of lenders and creditors, and many, such as South Africa, is both. It's an anti-Polonius. It's both a lender and a borrower. And so it's important for us to act. The Africa Expert Panel will try to link to the finance track. There's South Africa and the AU is there, but also Nigeria and Egypt have observer status in that track. And I think it's becoming clear that there's momentum on the African continent behind this idea. So how do we mobilize and channel that momentum will be very important.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Maybe first of all, go back to Milambo, and it's more of a hypothetical question. What if there was this borrowers forum 2020, way back in 2020? How would things have been very different for Zambia?
Yeah, very interesting question. It's hypothetical, right? So it can go either way. It depends on the assumptions that you put to the hypothetical. Well, looking at Zambia's case, you have to first understand how it got into where it got to. A point where we actually got to a point of default, and you would have to look at both the internal and external circumstances that led to that. Of course, internally there were safeguards that were breached, and externally the environment wasn't ready for a country that was going to go through a shock of that nature. So it was somewhat of a perfect storm in the sense that internally we're edging towards distress. And had the Borrowers Forum existed, perhaps would have had better capacities to avoid going off the cliff. better capacities in terms of just peer learning and things of that nature. Had we, gotten to a point where we fell off the cliff, I think the next thing would be the external environment. Would it have been better ready for a situation like that? And that's where now the question of the common framework, perhaps if there was a structured borrowers platform together with a structured creditors platform, would have probably come up with a scenario mechanisms that would receive countries in this situation. Now, what happened in the case of Zambia, of course, we had the prolonged situation with the common framework. That's partly because we're trying to fix the engine while the engine was running. And so, if we had the situation where we had these platforms in place, perhaps the common framework would have been established way before countries go into distress. And so you see that as the common framework has somewhat matured, the other countries that have gone through the process have had a much shorter period because it's been a learning process. So that's probably my hypothetical response.
No, thanks a lot. Thank you. I want to come to Ryder. You've been a very strong advocate of this borrowers forum, borrowers club, and we've now listened to the vice minister telling us that one needs to look at this as part of the financing for development. How do you see Africa benefiting, especially in terms of securing finance?
Thank you very much. And let me just also agree strongly with what all the other panelists have said, and the minister as well, in terms of the opportunity that we have here. In 2022, we had our first discussion on borrower coordination in DC, hosted in partnership with the Center for Global Development at that time. And in that discussion, we talked about the opportunity for borrower coordination in particular as it relates to regional financing. So, for example, having borrowers work together in order to raise funds for cross-border projects, and to raise it in such a way that it's not just that you don't have to slice each piece of the cross-border project, that you can actually bring those things together. You can raise money as one. I think that still remains an important means of working to secure finance. I think it's something we don't do enough. And if you look at the report that we did work with ACET and AfriCatalyst on, that is a key gap in terms of raising finance and doing that collectively. But we need to start somewhere. And I think what we do have at the moment are excellent forums, initiatives. We have the African Legal Support Facility. We have MEFME, who work to support countries in a, very providing some of that peer-to-peer learning, especially debt management offices, supporting one-to-one countries with, legal services when they're coming to coordinate. But there is still a gap in terms of advocacy, in a sense of having very specific outcomes that ministers of finance really want to shift, because it is their lived experience as ministers of finance that need to that they realize this cannot go on, and this is a fundamental structural flaw of the system. And that's what I was referring to in my opening, in terms of when you have creditors who have fundamentally designed a system, when you're not thinking about it from a borrower's perspective, there's a lot that just doesn't, that you just won't engage on. Things like the thresholds issues, why should when Somalia gets to middle-income country status, why should Somalia's rate of access to finance interest rates automatically jump up? That's it absolutely makes no sense, because when you get to middle-income country status, you actually need even more finance in many ways than you might have done at a low-income country. So why should finance then automatically be more expensive? Why does Egypt have more expensive finance than Somalia? Is there a reason for that? So there are some fundamental questions. I think these are, but it is I think it's at a Minister of Finance level that a borrowers forum can really address and can help in terms of the debt relief negotiations, for sure. Coordinating around some of those questions. What does good debt relief look like? What is our absolute minimum request that we're all going to be putting in? If we're talking about Zambia, back in 2020, I think maybe there might have been, who else is in this same situation? Who wants to default? Because we were all but we're all facing COVID-19 constraints, fiscal constraints. Governments were spending really a lot. African governments were spending a lot to deal with COVID-19. So who else is in this situation? Can we all have a minimum request that we need from our creditors? And one in which, for example, the debt service suspension initiative came in, yes, but there were many countries that didn't join because of the issues around market access. So how do we design a system? How do we put forward a system for creditors to agree with and deliver, because we're all in this together, so that then so that initiatives like that can actually be successful for everybody and not just for one or two countries. So I think these are the kinds of gaps that we as Development Reimagined have really tried to really believe there's a gap to address in negotiation, advocacy, yes, but real negotiation, and then also in terms of accessing finance and pushing down the cost of finance. Fundamentally, that's also what the Borrowers Forum has to deliver.
Thanks a lot for even touching on the potential role of MEFMI in terms of the upskilling and building capacity of officials and institutions in the borrower countries. And we are ever ready to provide technical assistance, debt management expertise, and institutional support. And we will support also the collective voice of the borrowers. Now, I would like to bring you in. I mean, you've listened to some of the potential benefits of a collective voice. Not very many shortcomings have come up. It can also be used to galvanize both borrowers but also creditors, and can be a source of financing. Yeah, source of financing for development. Now, I do have some blind spots. I cannot see all of you from where I'm seated. So some of you may have to stand up as you put up your hands so that I can recognize you. So I want to bring you in, put up your hands, and then I'll recognize you. We have about 20 to 25 minutes. Yes, please. Yes, sir.
Sorry. The G20 has taken on responsibility for the debt architecture in a way which it didn't always have, but the common framework is a G20 initiative, and it is effectively the G20 which is effectively determining at least that part of the architecture of debt management and restructuring. And the G20 is fundamentally unbalanced. And within the G20, as I'm afraid we will see tomorrow, there is tremendous resistance by countries that won't be named here to changing anything. The status quo seems to work for them. And so this fundamental point that there needs to be developing country voice in the system, I think has been very starkly revealed by the G20 process. And Michael and Hanif have gone, but South Africa tried very hard this year with a very clear steer from the president of South Africa to get to push on debt. And I'm afraid what we will see tomorrow in the G20 statement is not what was hoped. So that fundamental point, I think, it justifies this extraordinarily. I wanted to ask a question, if I could, because borrowers in the world as a whole are very diverse, and there is a case which I know has been made by some for a more regionally focused club, particularly in Africa, where borrowers are also diverse, but perhaps a little less diverse. And it might be easier to get the sense of commonality on the continent, and similarly potentially within Latin America, Caribbean, and Asia or islands. And the SIDS have got their own borrowers club kind of idea, which, to be perfectly honest, is not much more than an idea, but it got into the financing and development statement. So the question I wanted to ask is what is the balance of thinking in the group between a global club and regional clubs or chapters of the global club or whatever? How does that work in your heads at this point?
Thank you. We will take it to.
Thank you very much for your insights today. Ameya Joshi from A Data at the College of William Mary in Virginia. I guess I have a question similar to the one that was just asked, just from a different perspective, that of creditors. Dr. Malambo mentioned the Paris Club and the Borrowers Club coordinating with the Paris Club potentially, but the reality is also that the rise of non-Paris Club lenders, especially on the African continent, cannot be denied. So in this context, I was wondering if the panelists and also Ms. Ryder could speak a bit about the role of China in kind of supporting or coordinating with the Borrowers Club and the Borrowers Forum. Also, essentially, kind of just also as a follow-up, in terms of the Borrowers Club, even in the African continent, there are multiple borrowers with different kinds of debt. Some borrowers with more of domestic debt than external debt. Again, debt to the Paris Club versus the non-Paris Club. So how does that also work in terms of coordinating the amount of debt that not just the amount of debt that you have, but also the characteristics of the different kinds of debt that African countries might have?
Thank you. Take those two first, I think. Dr. Malambo, you want to go first or? Well, please. Okay, Osman, please.
Yeah. Thank you. No, thank you for that question. It was also something that I was really thinking about as well in terms of how all this works, because we're always coming together, I think, in the global south, in Africa, to tackle issues. And I think I've been part of so many different types of forum, whether it's climate advocacy, G7 plus for fragile. So there's so many things around this advocacy stuff. So I think if it was only just if the Borrowers Club was only just for the purpose of advocacy, I don't think it will really work, unfortunately. So I would, but for it to really do something and implement or have an impact, I do agree with you. There needs to be some commonalities, like between some thread kind of bringing it together. So I'm just kind of putting things out there in a way, but I think it is helpful to have something at the global level that is bringing principles together, that is looking at advocacy, that is looking at what the terms is, something that could kind of give it voice. But I think when it comes down to it, I am for having a more regional or thematic view of it. And I think one of the things that we're part of in Somalia. In fact, it's a meeting that's happening right now. It's the Horn of Africa initiative, that's really bringing together regional integration, how you can have, infrastructure that's going across, the different countries in our region, that's connecting, like whether it's digital, just examples of, getting fiber optic cables from Ethiopia through to Somalia, or looking at, having transfer of energy and stuff, like, these things that we need, like real infrastructure and energy regionally. And I think having these regional groups and pockets come together around real projects that have been structured for the purpose of integration is really helpful, because I think then it also kind of covers, it also solves for a key problem as well in Africa about regional integration and how do we integrate, and then maybe using a borrowers club at the regional level that can bring together this. I think that could be helpful. I think in the other ways that it's also what I'm seeing right now, though, although the Horn of Africa initiative has been great, we use it as a tool for fundraising as well for the region for these projects. We use it as a tool of kind of bringing together creditors around this, of raising financing for these specific projects, for getting these projects structured. But it almost seems like we're just in this in parallel, but just around this framing. It's not real integration in terms of like, can we attract lower interest rates? Can we attract lower rates because we're actually pooling risk together? So I don't think we haven't gotten to that yet. Where what I'm seeing right now is that Ethiopia would have, certain rates, Somalia would have a different rates. Maybe we can access this pool of funds, they can access this pool of funds, but it's the same bridge going across. So I think this is where we need to get to, where we are actually having pooled rates. We are negotiating one terms across the region in that way. So I can see clubs that are at the region level. I could also see clubs across the thematic level as well. Whether we're addressing things around, climate adaptation or whatever it may mean, because then you can kind of bring together countries that are, they're all falling under, cyclical droughts, with for mass agriculture investments. So kind of negotiating specific financial instruments specifically, for agri investments, and bringing together clubs around there, because then it's easier to kind of implement and structure because you know what that is. So it could be some kind of hybrid in the sense that we have a global umbrella that's really there for advocacy, but we know advocacy and we kind of know how it goes a lot of the times in getting these positions across. But then at a very practical level, trying to use some of those principles around regionally integrated types of programming, or around, thematically organized types of programming. Thanks.
Thank you very much. In the 2 minutes that I have remaining with you. Yeah, so just to add to what the governors put forward, indeed, the way that member states have looked at the same question of regionalism, and by the way, also the issue around themes, is the very same response is put forward very articulately. Is really, we can envision a situation where we're going to have chapters within the global umbrella. Yeah, and that's perhaps the direction that things will go. Some chapters, of course, will be more stronger than others. Like already within Africa, the solidarity is quite strong on many issues, but I think others will come along. Then just on the question of non-Paris Club lenders, at this point in time, I think it's early to make an assessment, because so far what we've heard formally is that which was verbalized during the negotiation process of the document. And by and large, we see that both all classes of lenders and borrowers were solid behind the formation of a borrowers club. So I think, like I said in my first intervention, there's been broad consensus and support for the initiative. But also we see, just to zero in on China, I think we see some alignments between the recently launched Global Development Initiative for China and the core principles around FFD4. So we expect that generally they'll be supportive of such initiatives. And then maybe moderator, if we could just give a last thought. The last thought is that we truly feel that this is the moment that this is going to happen. And we say this because we see the momentum, we see there's a push for results. There are many players who are looking at this issue. And so there's a formation of sorts that's taking place, and I think it's going to rain soon. It's going to rain soon. We think we'll get a result. But also, I think we need to keep in mind that we must not forget to address the original sin here. Why do countries get into situations of debt distress? why in the first place do they even go outside to borrow external financing? In the case of Africa, it's to a large extent it's got to do with the insufficient resources, like the governor put it forward, insufficiency of concession of financing. We have huge infrastructure gaps, huge energy gaps, which we need to close, but we cannot find the financing at the right price and at the right quantity. That is the original sense. Should we address those core issues? Should we be able to address them through domestic resource mobilization? We need not go externally to borrow funds which are really hard to get, and you find yourself in a situation. So we need to look at the whole picture, the full, cycle of it. Where does the origination of debt come from? Motivation to get this external debt. So, yes, we'll have a borrowers platform, but we need to work on domestic resource mobilization. We need to close the infrastructure gap. Fundamentally, this is all about delivering for our people and delivering development. So I thank you very much.
I want to push this to Ryder. Do you see any weakening in this idea by going for regional chapters and any of the other chapters that have been proposed as opposed to the global one?
And I'd like to hear your thoughts on China. On China too, yes.
Okay,
I know, because that was directed at me as well.
Yeah.
So I'm on the Africa Experts panel as well. And we are of the view that we do need a borrowers forum that is African led, very much African owned. And that is a particular gap. Michael, you did refer to a few others, other coordination platforms that exist. But all of them, I think, can do with some strengthening. But there is momentum from FFD around a UN or all borrowers within the member states forum. So I think we shouldn't lose sight of that and what it can offer. But we should be thinking very carefully about making sure there is not duplicating what is already there and what already has potential to really grow and flourish, right? We don't need anything to come in the way of MEFME. Keep on going, keep on doing, strengthen its work. We don't need things to come in the way of what the Organization for Southern Cooperation are doing. We need to strengthen it, etc. These sorts of things. So, but there is a gap, and Hodana has talked about many of those. Zambia the same. Ambassador Milambo also talked about the same. And I think the very, very serious kind of extra gap beyond the debt relief question is around the negotiation of new finance, of fresh finance, and negotiation of finance that has a much lower cost of capital for all countries. On the role of China, interestingly enough, for us as Development Reimagined, an inspiration for borrowers coordination came from China, from being in China, because the effectiveness of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, which has been around since 2000, was obvious that by having African coordination that feeds into that forum, you can actually deliver new outcomes that China itself can't come up with. And so China is a creditor. So China is already engaging with borrowers on their own, right? That's the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. The question for us as Development Reimagined was, are African governments really taking advantage of this enough? Are we seeing the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation as a means to negotiate some of these issues? And can we structure that in a way that really delivers? And so when it came to things like the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable, when it came to things like the G20 Common Framework, we were there saying, no, 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 no. It's not about bringing China into the room with other creditors. That's not what's going to deliver here. What's going to deliver is strengthening African negotiators and those who are already engaging with China as a creditor, because also China's credit system, lending system is very different. So you have to negotiate and work with China as a creditor on its own terms, on what kind of lending. You see this you'll see this with your debt management offices. You can't put British lending and Chinese lending together. They don't correspond. They have completely different terms of reference. So why would you have those two in the same room when you're negotiating? Why does it matter to you as a borrower? So that is why, of course, China's not going to be a detractor when it comes to a borrower's club, because China already works with borrowers. But there's an opportunity for us to strengthen how we input into that process. And the stronger that borrowers are and working together and understand on all these different issues, all these different levels of what there is to negotiate, then we can actually get more from each different creditor. I think that's our theory of change.
Thanks. It's becoming more interesting. Yes, is there anybody apart from him who also wants to come in? You can go ahead. I will recognize others, please.
PhD dissertation on the subject of the political economy of debtor coordination, looking at Cartagena as a case study, but then also looking at today. So I will be bugging many of you for interviews after this. I'm curious, I know we've lost some of the speakers, but we've had represented here today many of the countries that have clearly taken this project to heart and are very admirably leading on this effort. But can the panelists share a little bit more about the reception that they've received from other countries, particularly in other regions, in Latin America, in Asia? Where has there been sort of the friendliest reception? What are the challenges, and what appear to be maybe the dividing lines in how different countries have responded to this initiative?
I think we can learn more from you on this topic, but it's generally my finance minister that's actually engaged in these discussions. But I think what I've seen is generally um, more of an opening to talk about a change in the larger global financial architecture. So because that opening for dialogue has happened, I think you do find a lot more openness in terms of what change can be. Even now, I mean, like today at 4 o'clock, I do have a governance meeting, like a closed session meeting that the World Bank governors have come together to see how can we bring change to how the World Bank sometimes makes their rules around allocations for concessional financing and such. I think during the spring, I was in different meetings again with the IMF and such, like all of these different roundtables that are having the same conversations around. Even my colleague who's just left to go somewhere else and have the same conversation. So I think we are at a moment with it where it is quite open and people are willing to discuss these things and how it could work. There is quite a lot of momentum around this idea of a borrowers club. I am hearing the term come in again and again in all the meetings that I've been attending in annual meetings. So I think there's quite a reception to it in that way. But I'll just take this opportunity as well just to kind of continue on what Hannah was saying and maybe conclude as well. But I think these discussions, as well as like the involvement of China, I think what it's really done is just open up options for Africa more than anything else. I think this narrative of like it being a scramble for Africa or whatever, I think we really shifted from that. And I think the more countries like China come in, the more competition, the more it actually puts us more in a position of opportunity to be able to negotiate. So I actually do welcome other other actors coming in. And it's not just China, there's also the Gulf states, there's also the Middle East that's coming in. I mean, last week I was in Saudi Arabia, meeting with the Saudi development banks, with the Saudi fund and others who were quite interested in to come into Africa. I mean, you see Qatar, who's done a massive investment, in Rwanda, in their airports and transport hub. You see India that's coming in. So it's not just China, Africa dynamic. It's also China, US. It's also a lot of emerging countries that are coming in that want to get into the space. And to be frank with you, the conversations that we were having with a lot of these countries, not just Saudi, but Europe and others, is that okay? Well, we want to come, we want to borrow for port, and they immediately want to talk to us about how can they bring their companies in. So they'll give you concessional financing, but they also want to bring their companies in because they also see the opportunity, right? So this is what's been happening. So I think the more I shouldn't say this, but the more fragmented these creditors are, the better for us as borrowers to then be actually come together as more of a unit and more defined, because then we can take space of this kind of shifting, global dynamic, and be able to have better negotiating terms with different creditors that are coming to the table in that way. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Reda, you want to come in on anything?
I can
Reception?
do very briefly and perhaps also sort of concluding in a way too, because I think so. Of course, I think you've lost the people who, and also Mahmoud Mohideen was meant to be here, but unfortunately he got stuck in a negotiation, so he sends his apologies. Those who would know what was said in negotiations are not here. But I think we've seen the V20, for example, come together, the SIDS, etc., as referred to earlier. There seems to be an appetite for coming together on these issues and advocating as a global South, if we can call it that, in terms of borrowing. Um, and there's also opportunity, I think, in learning lessons across regions. Even the issues that Hodan just mentioned, different countries and regions have approached these issues differently. And when you also realize, Africa is the only region without an actual monetary fund, how do we go about setting up monetary funds and managing them? We can learn from other regions on that basis. So there's still so much coordination that we can do. We're at the maybe we tried to do a lot in the early 80s, Cartagena and so on. It just didn't take off as it should have. But we have an opportunity now to rectify that. So let's do it.
Thanks a lot. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We started off with this having a borrower club, but I think we have all recognized that we also have diversity in terms of the borrower side and the creditor side, and there's nothing that stops us under this huge umbrella having different borrower groups dealing with different different creditors. But I think underlying all this is having African negotiating terms, or the borrowers negotiating terms that are beneficial in terms of financing for development in a sustainable way. So for closing, I'll call on Rob Floyd, the Director of Innovation and Digital Policy at the African Center for Economic Transformation.
Thank you, Lewis. Firstly, a big thanks to everyone that made this possible. The Honorable Vice Minister, the Permanent Representative Malambo, Governor Osman, Lewis, Michael from South Africa. And I want to particularly note the leadership from Zambia and Egypt on this. I think that it's made much more progress than I think any of us would have seen going into Seville. And of course, want to thank our partners, Development Reimagined, IEG. If I look back just a few months, not far from here, we had an event on borrower coordination. And it's pretty amazing how far the conversation is evolving. I think it's important that it's in the context of the global financial architecture reforms that are taking place, which creates an opportunity for us all to advance this much faster than we might have otherwise. I also think it's just a quick takeaway thinking about the objectives of borrower coordination. I mean, there's a technical aspect, right? Countries need lower cost of capital, lower interest rates, better tenors. There's also a values-based aspect about fairness. Michael mentioned tilting the playing field. There's one about voice, sovereignty, a more equitable global system. But most importantly, and it's been mentioned, but I think it's worth emphasizing, is that all of this discussion at the end of the day is about development outcomes, right? It's about countries being able to invest in their human capital, in infrastructure, in agriculture, trade, etc. I very much like the conversation about the global versus regional, and needless to say, it's not one or the other. I mean, if we think within the context of the global system, there's standards, there's thresholds, there's rules that can be developed at a global level, but the collective action will likely take place at the regional level, right? Of countries actually negotiating together for better terms. I hadn't thought about, though, the joint advocacy part of your friends, right? And I mean, many of us in this room, I think that come from civil society, think tanks, et cetera. We do this a lot, right? We collaborate, we come together like we have here. And I think the example of friends of Somalia coming together to advocate is an important one that we can build upon. I think there's a couple of things where there's still gaps. One is around evidence. So, Governor, you mentioned your Minister of Finance. I'm sure going into any type of collective action where you're sharing maybe sensitive data with your neighbors around a regional project and so forth, the Minister of Finance is going to ask, what am I going to get out of this? So I think we still need evidence, case studies of what collective action might mean. How much money is actually going to be saved, and how can that be used for productive purposes? And I should have mentioned, I think we should always start these discussions that debt is not bad, productive debt is good, and therefore we shouldn't shy away from that. The other aspect that I think more work is where more work is needed is, someone said, how we build upon these 30 plus initiatives. But I'm not sure that we yet know how to do that, right? How does MEFME and other institutions in the same space collaborate more? And I think many of us in this room have a responsibility to help identify those opportunities and to do it in a very constructive way that builds upon the comparative advantages of each of those organizations. So I thank you all very much. We look forward to continuing this conversation. Again, I think we're seeing more progress than we might have thought we would at this point, and so we need to stay at it. Thank you.